it's Shara from Woodshop Diaries, and today I'm going to show you how I built this dresser. In my last video, I showed you how I built a similar dresser, but it was a little bit taller and a little bit narrower. This time, I went shorter and wider and built a design that also matches my modern bedroom set. So if you're ready to get building, let's go. A couple weeks ago, I posted my 5-drawer dresser video. And I told you how I had been waiting for 2 years to build a matching dresser to complete my bedroom set. But I didn't want to build just one dresser style, mostly because I'm super indecisive. So I built 2 of them. Last week's was the taller, skinnier version, and this time I made it wider and shorter and with an open shelf. I'm sharing the printable plans below, and if you're interested in the entire set, I've put together a complete bundle with the bed, the nightstands, and both dresser plans. Okay, now let's get building. If any of this footage looks familiar, it's because it is. I built the side panels for both of these dressers the same way, just with slightly different dimensions. So if you saw the last video, this part is very similar. I glued up my own 2x2s to use for the frame and also glued up a middle panel to put inside. I built both of these dressers from 1x rough sawn poplar, so I had to mill up a lot of these pieces specifically to the size dimensions that I needed. Once I had my 2x2s glued together and milled down, and I had my side panels as well glued together and cut down to size, I was ready to assemble the side frames of the dresser. I used a combination of pocket holes and dowels on my last dresser, but this time, since part of the inside panel will be seen in the open cubby, I just went with dowels all the way. To do this, I dry fit my panels together and marked where I wanted to drill my dowel holes. And then I drilled corresponding dowel holes along all of the pieces at these marks using my Rockler dowel jig. And then I was able to glue the panel together. I glued and clamped the side panels and wiped away all the excess glue before setting it aside. Once the glue was dry, I drilled dowel holes along the top corners and the back bottom corner of the side panels and assembled the frame together using dowels and wood glue. This dresser was a lot longer than the last one that I built, so I had to double up on my clamps. Now, because everyone loves to see bloopers, I'll share my boo-boo with you here. When I was drilling the dowel holes on the side panels, I accidentally drilled 2 holes in the front bottom corner of one of the sides. Obviously, I don't need that hole for any structure or frame piece, so I ended up just gluing 2 dowels into the holes, and once the glue dried, I cut them flush with an oscillating saw and sanded them smooth. That's not the first time that I've drilled dowel holes in the wrong place, and I'm sure that it won't be the last. So helpful tip to everyone out there, pay attention when drilling your dowel holes. Okay, so up until this point, most of the build looked pretty much like the last dresser. But here things start to look a little different. Because this was going to have an open shelf, I needed to actually glue up that shelf. If you recall from the last video, I was building these drawers using rough sawn poplar. So I found 2 boards that I could rip down and glue up to make the size piece that I needed for the shelf. I cut this shelf down to be about 3/4 inch shallower than the overall width of the dresser. The drawer fronts will overlay these later, and so I wanted everything to be flush across the front of the frame. Once it was cut down to fit, I drilled 3/4 inch pocket holes along the edges to install. Up until this point, I had used dowels for everything, but I went with pocket holes here because it was quick, strong, and you wouldn't see them on the underside of the shelf. By the way, you knew you wouldn't make it through this entire video without seeing me at some point working in my rain boots, right? I installed this into the dresser frame with pocket hole screws, making sure that both sides were equally spaced down from the top. Now I had the main parts of the dresser together, but I needed to add the structural frame pieces to hold and support the drawer boxes. For this, I found 3 long scraps about the size of a 1x3. You could use anything for this really, scrap 3/4 inch plywood, 1x2, 1x4, whatever you've got. I like to use as much of my scraps as possible, so I just used some offcuts for this. I cut these to the correct length and installed them in place using pocket holes and screws. I put one of these in the back right under the shelf. This will help a little in preventing it from bowing in the middle, and then I attached 2 more even with the bottom of the side panels. Once those were in place, I cut a piece of 3/4 inch plywood to use as the drawer divider. I placed this into the dresser frame and marked where to drill the pocket holes to secure it in place. After drilling those pocket holes at my marked locations, I installed it in the center using pocket hole screws. It's important here to get this piece in the very center of the dresser so that the drawer boxes on both sides will be equal size. This just makes things easier. Now it was time to add the slides. I installed 4 pair of ball bearing slides into the dresser. I've got an entire post on how to install drawer slides and drawer boxes that I will link below. Once the slides were in place, I moved on to building the drawers. If you've noticed in my past videos, I really like to build my drawers from 3/4 inch plywood, so I ripped strips from my plywood sheet about 6 inches wide to make the drawers from. I cut the drawer box pieces down on the miter saw and then cut a dado along the bottom for a 1/4 inch plywood bottom to be inserted later. I assembled the drawer boxes using pocket holes and screws and then installed them into the dresser. Again, I'll link my detailed post below for how I build and install my drawer boxes in case you want specifics. Now that the drawers were in, I was ready to add the drawer fronts. I had gotten one really wide board when I picked up my lumber, and I thought it would look really cool to make these 4 fronts out of one solid board so that it kind of looked like a continuous grain pattern. But it was about a 1/2 inch narrower than I needed, but I ended up using it anyway. Almost. We're gonna try it. I thought the design element of the continuous grain fronts outweighed the fact that the drawer fronts wouldn't come quite flush with the top of the shelf. This board was way too wide to fit through the planer, so I ended up having to rip it first on the table saw and then I ran it through the planer to get everything nice and smooth. Once the boards were cut down to size, I flipped the dresser on its back and screwed the fronts in place, making sure to keep the grain matching up along the front. If you remember on the last dresser build, I used my router to cut a small rabbet along the top edge for just a little subtle design detail. So I did the same on this dresser too. The nightstands in both dressers have this little detail and I don't know why, but I just really love it. It kind of makes the top look like it's floating off of the frame, just a little bit. Speaking of the top, I glued up a top panel to finish this up, and while the glue was drying on it, I went ahead and finished the dresser base with Walrus Oil Furniture Butter. Just like the last dresser, this poplar was very green once it was finished, so I carried it out to bake in the sun for a few hours to brown it up a little. Once the glue on the top panel was dry, I trimmed it down to fit the exact size of the dresser frame, finished it, and then took it out to bake in the sun for a while too. If you didn't already know, if your poplar is green, you can leave it out in the sun for a couple of hours to turn it more brown and give it a warmer tone. Just an FYI. Then, just like the last dresser, I glued and clamped it in place. Again, I know this isn't the quote-unquote correct way to do this because of potential issues with wood movement, but I'm taking my chances as my past experience doing it on several pieces hasn't caused any problems. Finally, I added these long modern pulls to match the same ones that I used on my nightstands, and just like that, dresser number 2 was finished. I ended up selling the last one, but I think I'll keep this one for one day when we eventually move out of our studio-style tiny house. If you're wanting specific dimensions, the plans, the tools and materials list, or all the details on this build, be sure to check out the links in the description for all of that information. I've got plenty more big builds coming soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on all the upcoming shenanigans. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, happy building!